Hello, welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Arena. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. If you haven't heard my other announcement video, Wizards of the Coast has officially announced Fallen Empires Remastered is coming to MTG Arena. Not only is it going to be legal in Timeless and Historic, it is going to be released for Standard play. It is also going to have its own limited format. So for Standard play, you can go check out my top 10 video for the most impactful cards. This is going to be a complete set review for limited play for draft. And the comments I make here also generally would apply to sealed as well. So this is the basic rating scale that we're going to be using. So a 5.0 would just about have to be a colorless card that is capable of winning the game by itself. Some past sets have had cards like Razormane Masticore, things like that got ratings approaching 5. Most cards never get there. 4.5 would be an incredible bomb, like one of the most powerful cards in the set that also can win the game by itself. 4.0 would be a good rare or a top tier uncommon. 3.5 is a top tier common or a solid uncommon. 3.0 is a good one to remember. It's a good playable that always makes the cut. Basically, if you're in the colors, then a 3.0 basically always makes it into your deck. And a 2.5 is also another common rating. It's a solid playable that rarely gets cut, so usually makes the deck. 2.0 is not a bad rating. I know it sounds low on a rating up to 5, but 2.0s often make the cut into a draft deck. And it's a good playable, but sometimes it gets cut. 1.5 is not a great rating. That's a filler card. You play it if you need a few extra playables. You don't feel too embarrassed about it, but you don't feel too happy about it either. 1.0 is bad filler. Like in Murders at Karlov Manor, there's a 3/6 black ogre. You can pay 3, sack a creature, draw a card. If it's suspected, you draw 2. That one I'd call something like a 1.0. It's a body on the field. It blocks decently well, but it's really an extremely forgettable card. 0.5 generally is relegated to the sideboard. Maybe it only destroys artifacts and enchantments, or it's just such a bad card that you'd only ever sideboard it in a really weird matchup. And 0 means you just shouldn't use it at all under any circumstances. With that in mind, here are my limited ratings for Fallen Empires. So first up, we've got Combat Medic. And a card like this is hard to evaluate until you know a little bit more about the format. So I'm going to be commenting on what you can expect to see in Fallen Empires. And that's going to affect the grade on cards like this one. So this is a 3-mana 0/2. It's a human cleric soldier. You can pay a white and a colorless. Prevent the next 1 damage that will be dealt to any target this turn. So this allows you to muck with combat math. It allows you to mess around with direct damage, burn, and pings, and that is a thing in this format. There are 2 common creatures that are capable of dealing 1 damage to any target. So the combat medic can upset the plans of the opponent, can change combat math in your favor. I think having a 1-of copy is pretty reasonable. The second copy obviously drops off to being pretty terrible because it only ever serves as a blocker. It can't win the game for you. It could only ever stall out the game for you. So 1 copy of this card is pretty valuable for how it affects the gameplay whenever you have mana open. So With that in mind, it's a little bit hard to rate because you really don't want it in multiples. I'm going to give it a 2. You know, the first copy that you play, I think, is approaching a 3, just because of how much one copy affects the entire battlefield. And the second copy is like a 1, let's say. You know, a 2 toughness blocker that can prevent damage to itself to become even more toughness is an okay body on the battlefield, but it doesn't help you to win the game at that point. So first copy is great, next copies are garbage. Overall rating, I'm going to give it a 2. Next up, we've got Feralite Priest. This is a 1/3 for 3 human cleric. It's actually a pretty substantial body. There are some noteworthy 2/2s in this format that kind of demand to be blocked, and this can do that. So the Feralite Priest is a pretty reasonable stat line, all things considered. It can also funnel colorless mana into being white mana. And then if the ability is activated 4 or more times in the turn, you sacrifice this at the beginning of the next end step. Just don't do it more than 3 times. And you've got a white mana filter. You also have a pretty reasonable chunk of body on the field that can stop some important creatures. Black has some 2/2s that if they attack and they are not blocked, they can be sacrificed to do things like make you discard 3 cards or destroy target creature the opponent controls can't be regenerated. Clearly you don't want those things to get through and connect. So having a 1/3 is actually pretty valuable. It outsizes quite a bit of what's going on. Also in white, you want to stop Feral Zealot down here. We'll look at that in a second. So because of the presence on the battlefield with its toughness, I think this card's right around a 3. You know, not super exciting, doesn't do anything dramatic to win the game, but helps lock up the board and does have some power so it can threaten the opponent. Next up we have Feral's Mantle. This is an aura. Only goes on creatures. Whenever enchanted creature attacks and is not blocked, its controller may have it deal damage equal to its power +2 to another target creature. And if they do, the attacking creature assigns no combat damage this turn. So when you put Feral's Mantle on something, if it gets through and it's not blocked, it can do like a green bite effect. Equal to its power +2 to another creature. Most of the creatures in this format are not that big. So if you put this on something and it gets through, you're probably going to kill whatever you point this at. Feral's Mantle is an interesting card. There's not a lot of hard removal in this format. So being able to pair white with a red splash, and the red splash makes your creatures much harder to block. This can turn Feral's Mantle into real removal. So you can't have too many copies of this in your deck, obviously. You need some setup. Right? You need a creature to put it on, and you need a way to get that creature in. But still, I think this is not a bad card in the format, and I would give it a 2.5. Alright, next we have Feral Zealot. This is a human. No other types. 2/2 for 3. Whenever Feral Zealot attacks and is not blocked, you may have it deal 3 damage to target creature. If you do, it assigns no combat damage this turn. So this is like the aura, except it's just the effect is stapled onto this body, and it hits harder than its power, which is interesting. So if you can get this through, it can deal 3 to something, which again threatens to kill a lot of the creatures in this format. This is probably one of your go-to cards in white. It sets up part of an aggressive strategy with a red splash. to make your creatures very difficult to block and to be able to take out key cards of the opponents. So I would say Feral Zealot is approaching a 3.5. As I said, there's not much removal in the format, and there are ways to make this very difficult to block. You just have to be aware of what the limited format is like for Fallen Empires. Hand of Justice, this is a rare. It is a 2/6 avatar for 6. And that is a lot of stats compared to most of the creatures in this format. And it has the ability, tap 3 untapped white creatures you control, destroy target creature. I would say just for the size of this body alone, that is pretty playable. But obviously, if you can get this on the table with 3 other white creatures, its ability is just ridiculously powerful. So I think this is an absolute bomb in the format, as long as you have a heavy commitment to white, and you can turn this card on, which there's another rare card which gives you a lot of white creatures that works well with the hand. Then, yeah, I think this card's... I mean, it's a pretty aggressive format, but I still think I would give this card like a 4. Again, it takes a heavy commitment to white, and 6 is a lot of mana in this aggressive format, but I still think I would give this a 4. Heroism. This one can prevent the combat damage of red creatures that are attacking. So, you sacrifice a white creature to do this, and for each attacking red creature, you prevent its combat damage unless the controller pays a red and 2 colorless for each of those creatures. This is clearly a piece of sideboard tech. You don't know if you're going to be against a red deck or not. Red's not one of the stronger colors in the format. There's one particular card in red that really trips up other red decks. So, white already would love to splash a little bit of red to make its creatures hard to block, which means they can splash in Orcish Captain. So I don't know how necessary it is to run this card at all. I'm going to give this a 0.5. Ication Infantry. This is a 1/1 human soldier for 1 white. You can pay 1 colorless to give it first strike until end of turn. That's pretty good. And you can pay 1 colorless to give it banding until end of turn, which is also quite good. Now, there is a problem in this format that 1 toughness creatures have. One of them is named Ication Javelineers, right below the Ication Infantry. It's a pinger. It can only ping once, but it's such a powerful 1-drop that I think you would run as many copies as you get access to. And this means that 1 toughness creatures are of much lower value than they would normally be. There's also a creature named Thornthalid. And even though Thornthalid is slow, there is a green enchantment which can put spore counters onto the Thalids, which means they can machine gun down your 1 toughness creatures pretty rapidly. And since both of those are problems that you may run up against in the format, I don't think you can value 1 toughness creatures that highly. Still, it's a pretty aggressive format. You could get a very quick start. So, you could start running downhill at the opponent with first strike and banding. So, I think this card's okay, but it's not as great as it first seems with the pingers of the format. I think it's okay. I'm going to give it a 1.5. There's a few too many ways for it to die easily. Lycation Javelineers. We have a 1/1 human soldier for 1 white. Enters the battlefield with a javelin counter. Can tap to remove a javelin counter and deals 1 damage to any target. This is one of the best creatures of the format, I'm going to say. But the thing is, once you're aware of how strong Lycation Javelineers is, it changes how you choose cards in Fallen Empires, and your opponents will start highly prioritizing things that have 2 toughness. Which means that this will get outsized on the battlefield, and it won't be able to just easily kill something. You'll have to use like a damage as a combat trick, or you'll have to pair up 2 Javelineers to gang up on something. It's still a pretty good card. Now, it does suffer from being 1 toughness against an opposing Thorn Thallid, or against an opposing Lycation Javelineer. Still, I think this is one of your top white commons here. I think you choose this pretty highly, and later you can give it Menace or Flying using some red cards. I think I would give this about a 3.0, maybe 3.5. Lycation Lieutenant, this is a rare. It's 2 white. It's a 1/2 human soldier. You can pay a white and 1 target soldier creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So this is a real method of winning the game. Having 2 toughness means that it dodges some of the pingers of the format. Your opponent has to invest some real resources to get rid of this thing. And just like the damage preventer that we saw earlier, this can muck with combat math, so that your first striking or banding creatures can win in combat. Overall, I think this is a really nice card in white, and I think I give it a 3.5. Lycation Money Changer. It's 1 white for just a human, 0/2. Enters the battlefield with 3 credit counters. When it ETBs, it deals 3 damage to you. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put a credit counter on this. And then you can sacrifice this only during your upkeep to gain 1 life for each credit counter on it. So, the flavor of this card is it's making a long-term investment. You have to put some money down initially, which is the damage, and then eventually pays you back. That's the life. This is a 0/2, which means it survives the pingers of the format, but it has no threat on its own. It's not a soldier, so it doesn't have as much mechanical benefit in a deck. It could hang around as a blocker for a long time. If you've got the creature that prevents damage, it could be a very good blocker. Eventually, if the opponent's been able to chip in some damage on you in a long game, you can gain life. All of that said, I think this is a pretty poor creature overall. It doesn't threaten to win the game, and it doesn't play that well with the other cards of the set. So I think this card's about a 1. Lycation Phalanx. This is a 2/4 human soldier for 5. That's one of the better stat lines of the set. It has banding. I think you can argue this point, but I think this is one of the better creatures that was ever printed with banding. There are more interesting creatures that have banding printed on them, but this one has 4 toughness. And one of the big benefits you get with a attacking band or a defending band, you get to divvy up how the opponent's creature deals damage to yours. And so this having 4 toughness means that you can put 3 damage over on this creature and spread the damage around otherwise how you like. That is a big benefit when you're talking about banding. Even if it didn't have banding, this would be outsizing a lot of other creatures of the format. So I think this is about a 3. always a good solid inclusion in your deck. 5 mana is a lot to pay. The format's kind of aggressive, but it's got a very solid body for what's happening in Fallen Empires. And you can go the banding route to be able to make attacking bans that the opponent has trouble dealing with. So yeah, I think this just about always makes your deck. About, 2.5 or a 3. Lycation Priest. This is 1 white for a 1/1 human cleric. You can pay white, white, and 1, and target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So it's expensive to use, and it only has 1 toughness. Now this would make it vulnerable if you play it early, but you don't have to play it early. You can hold it in your hand and you can wait until later in the game to deploy the Lycation Priest. And if you do, and you have ways to protect the priest, like preventing damage to it or just its own pump ability, then this can, again, just like the damage preventer, it can offset the pingers of the format. It can muck with the combat math. And ultimately, this is one of the more reliable ways to find a path to winning the game in white. So even though this creature is fragile, and you probably don't want to deploy it until you have a lot of mana open, I still think the first copy of this card almost always makes it into your deck. And the second copy is not nearly as good. So yeah, I think the first copy of this card's, about a 3.5. And I think the second copy of this card is more like a 1.5, and it just drops off after that. Still, you definitely want to find this effect at some point over a long game to be able to get this down, protect it, and use its effect. So, it is a good valuable card, mostly as a one-of. Lycation Scout. This is a 1/1 for 1 white human soldier scout. You can pay 1 and tap, and target creature gains first strike until end of turn. So, whether or not this is a good card for your deck depends on if you're going all in on the plan of the Feralites. If you're using Feral's Zealot and Feral's Mantle, or if you maybe are in black-white and you are using the ones that can sacrifice if they get through unblocked, then the Lycation Scout giving your creature first strike means that the opponent could be in a kind of a no-win situation where they have to chump block your creature, otherwise you get to do its special effect. But chump blocking means they've lost a creature anyway. So the first strike that you can gain from this card, paired up with things like red cards giving your creature menace or flying, could make it extremely difficult to block and deal with. So even though this is a fragile creature that dies to the pingers of the format, if you have a very aggressive deck and you're all in on the 2/2s for 3 that if they get through unblocked, bad things happen, this can help push those things through for just 1 mana. And I think if you're in that deck, then this is a great card in that deck. So if you're in that archetype, I think the Lycation Scout is a good playable card in your deck. I'd give it about like a 2.5. If you're not in the archetype, it's almost unplayable, and I'd give it like a 1. Lycation Skirmishers. This is a rare. It is a 1/1 for 4. It's a human soldier. It has first strike and banding. And whenever it attacks, all creatures banded with it gain first strike until end of turn. This is a more interesting banding creature than the Phalanx we looked at earlier. But only having 1 toughness, this creature is extremely fragile, especially as a 4-drop. A single Javelineer can ping this thing dead. By the time you've gotten to 4-drops, it's very possible that an opponent's Thorn Thallid could gain some counters and ping this thing dead. So you need to be able to protect this card if you really want to get the benefit from it. It's a little too easy to kill. The upside is it's a very aggressive creature. You know, if you want to go for kind of a banding deck, then attacking in with a giant first striker, which is effectively what this would do, means that the opponent basically is in chump block mode, or they just have to take a bunch of damage. Being able to protect this, you're going to need, you know, at least 2 or 3 mana to either give this like +1/+1 or prevent 1 damage to it. So you couldn't really deploy this with protection until you get to like 6 or 7 mana. That makes it a bit niche, I think. Or maybe you're just up against someone who's not in the colors that have access to those pingers, like a blue deck or something. I think this card's about a 1.5 most of the time. If you can run it out onto the battlefield unopposed, where the opponent doesn't have the white and green pingers, then I think this could do some serious work for you. So in that situation, you know, this card might be more like a 3. Vacation Town. It's a rare sorcery for 6 mana. Create 4 1/1 white citizen creature tokens. So this is a pretty great card. Puts a lot of bodies and material on the battlefield for you. So this gives you chump blockers if you need them. It gives you extra creatures that can, you know, join in with attacking and blocking bands. And this notably works well with the Hand of Justice that we saw earlier, where you need to tap 3 untapped white creatures you control. You can probably imagine that if you played Hand of Justice for 6 mana, and then the next turn you play Vacation Town, you can tap the Hand of Justice right away to blow up your opponent's best creature. That's a heck of a 1-2 punch. It's a really good sequence. So, yeah, this card is a little slow with how aggressive the format is, but if you get into a slower game, then I think it's a good, solid card. Definitely a good use of 6 mana, so I give this card about a 3. And we got the Order of Leetbur. This is a human cleric knight, 2/1 for 2 white mana. It has protection from black. That is valuable. Black is possibly the strongest color of this format. So having a creature with protection from black is definitely a valuable trait. You can pay 1 white to give this first strike until end of turn. You can pay 2 white to give it a +1 power until end of turn. So the card is mana intensive, but very good. If you have enough white mana available, it can win just about any combat. It's just a question of having enough mana to help it win that combat. And it all has to be white. This is a pretty great creature, well positioned against black. The 1 toughness is a ding against it, though. If you're up against an opposing white deck or an opposing green deck, they're not going to have too much trouble killing this. So it might be helpful to, you know, get out the damage prevention to be able to protect this card. It's an interesting tension that's built in here. It's also very white mana dependent. Still, I think this card makes your deck most of the time. I'm going to give it a 2.5, and obviously if you're against a black deck, then it jumps up to like, I don't know, a 4. And that brings us to the end of white. So join me next time, we'll go over blue. We'll go through each of the colors, black, red, green, and then finally we'll end on lands and colorless. There are no multicolor cards in Fallen Empires, so there's not going to be a multicolor section. If you've gained some enjoyment from this, please like and subscribe. Check out my other videos. And until next time, never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy on this day of April 1st.